will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on the future of America's public lands. First, let me apologize. We had noticed this hearing a week ago, which was before the CDC and attending physician here at the Capitol's updated medical guidance. And so we had hoped that we could hold the hearing in person in the committee room. Unfortunately, we were unable to secure the technology connections before the hearing. So in any event, look forward to seeing all of you in person at our next hearing when it is so noticed, but appreciate your attendance here today. Under Committee Rule 4, subparagraph F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking member or their designees. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. As described in the notice, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Please note that members are responsible for their own microphones. As with our in-person meetings, members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. I'll now proceed with my opening statement. Again, thank you all for being here today for this subcommittee on national parks, forests, and public lands legislative hearing on 5 bills. The 5 bills that we will be discussing speak to the evolving relationship that we have with our public lands and our continued values of accessing its treasures while restoring and preserving it for the future. These efforts will provide benefits to the people across our country while also providing for more opportunities for local community engagement and involvement. From acknowledging the historical traditional uses of our federal public lands to considering land conveyances that allow for the restoration from previous uses, we look to our past relationship with the land to find a path for the future. There are 2 land conveyances proposed by my Republican colleagues that we will be discussing today. One will allow for the cleanup of the abandoned Gilt Edge Mine in South Dakota through the Gilt Edge Mine Conveyance Act. The second land conveyance bill we will consider today is the Wind River Administrative Site Conveyance Act. The legislation will allow for the conveyance of a historic site that the USDA Forest Service is currently responsible for. The conveyance would support the local community's vision for new recreation and business opportunities in a region made up of primarily federal land. We'll also be hearing a proposal to extend the fee authority for the Shasta, Trinity marinas in the Shasta, Trinity National Recreation Area. Such fees are critical to supporting the recreational infrastructure related to boating opportunities. I'm glad that we're also working to expand protections for places like the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument in California, which was designated in 2015 by President Obama through a presidential proclamation. H.R. 6366 demonstrates the value and support of such designations by local communities. We'll hear from both Tribal Chairman Anthony Roberts of the Yocha-Dihi Wintun Nation about the incredible community support that exists for this legislation. We'll also hear from subcommittee member Representative Teresa Leger-Fernandez on H.R. 5493, an important bill that would provide for more consultation and inclusivity, in our land management decision-making. Through the Land Grant Mercedes Traditional Use Recognition and Consultation Act, this legislation would call for the consideration of historical traditional uses in federal land management planning. Through legislation such as H.R. 5493, we acknowledge the rights of our predecessors to have a closer relationship once again with the land. A recognition of historical traditional uses imparts our commitment to restoring those rights. Preserving and protecting public lands that include important designations such as national recreation areas, national monuments, national wilderness designations allow us to understand the wide range of benefits that will continue to grow for all of us and for future generations of Americans. Finally, before I just close, I would be remiss if I didn't say that this subcommittee has worked incredibly hard during the course of the last 2 years to be bipartisan. It is precisely why, unlike many other subcommittees, the five bills that we're considering today, 2 are Republican bills. And as was mentioned, Those two bills involve land conveyances, federal land conveyances back to the states, which is something I know that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have often advocated for. And so I would hope that the minority today would recognize that fact. And I know in the past they have been critical of the priorities of this subcommittee, notwithstanding that the subcommittee on those occasions was ultimately considering Republican bills, bills that were brought forward by Republican members of the Congress in an effort to ensure that we are being responsive to every member of this body, not just members of my caucus. So I hope and trust the minority would recognize that fact, and will hope against hope that that is the case. With that, I will yield the balance of my time and will now recognize the ranking member for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman DeGoose. And we recognize that fact. I begin my statement by conveying sincere thanks for canceling the legislative hearing on the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act. That had been planned for last month. That legislation would have locked up over 23 million acres of land in the West, including 9 million acres in my home state of Idaho. And it was universally opposed by the members who represent those areas. So canceling that hearing has set a positive tone for the future work of this subcommittee, and it sends a sign that we're willing to focus on issues that unite us. As I mentioned during our last hearing, our constituents are facing higher gas and energy prices due to American dependence on foreign sources and the tragedy unfolding in Ukraine. Also, recent policies driven from Washington, D.C. have exacerbated inflation and supply chain challenges, which in turn have resulted in an incremental tax on all Americans. These crises demand that we as leaders engage with a swift bipartisan change of course. And I look forward to moving forward with the bipartisan legislation that have real chances to become law, like several of the bills on today's hearing list, and bills like your BOLT Act, which we considered last month. And I'm pleased with the two Republican bills on today's hearing, as they are both examples of how reducing land under federal ownership can create a win-win situation for federal, state, and local governments. The first bill is Representative Herrera Butler's Wind River Administrative Site Conveyance Act in Convents County in Representative Herrera Butler's district. It's almost 77% federally owned. Because of the overwhelming presence of federal land, less than 2% of the county's land base can be taxed at full market value, greatly restricting the area's ability to be governed locally. Representative Herrera Butler's bill would unlock new economic opportunities for nearby rural communities by transferring ownership of approximately 23 acres comprised of the Wind River Nursery site from the Forest Service to the county. The county plans to use this land to create new lodges, which will help drive more tourists to the surrounding Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. Another important bill on this hearing is Representative Dusty Johnson's Gilt Edge Mine Conveyance Act. Gilt Edge Mine is a former mining site in South Dakota that is now in need of environmental remediation. South Dakota is interested in purchasing approximately 266 acres of this site in order to facilitate further environmental restoration of the area after the EPA completes its portion of the cleanup work. Funds from the sale will then be put into a special fund that can be used to improve the health of the Black Hills National Forest. Due to federal mismanagement, a local sawmill had to shut down its operations last year, and several other small mills are at risk of closure. I hope the Forest Service will use these funds to support the surrounding communities and infrastructure, which are vital to ensuring the long-term health of the Black Hills National Forest. I'm also thankful to Representative Herrera Butler and Johnson for introducing these bills and working with their constituents to build consensus and support. Both of these bills contain policies that promote the environmental and economic benefit that can occur when we transfer federal lands to state and counties for beneficial uses, and I hope we'll consider more like them in the coming months. Finally, I do have some concerns about some of the other bills we're considering today. I'll conclude with my remarks by once again thanking Chairman DeGoose for his leadership of this subcommittee, and once again for canceling the hearing on the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act. With that, thank you to our witnesses for appearing here today. I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. I'll now turn to our witnesses. Before introducing them, I'll remind non-administration witnesses that they're encouraged to participate in the Witness Diversity Survey created by the Congressional Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Witnesses may refer to their hearing invitation materials for further information. Let me remind the witnesses that under our committee rules, They must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but that their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When you begin, the timer will start and it will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining and red when your time has expired. I recommend that members and witnesses joining remotely use stage view so that they may pin the timer on their screen. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. I'll also allow the entire panel to testify before questioning the witnesses. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Dakota, Mr. Johnson. And if Mr. Johnson is not with us, we will skip to Mr. Huffman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was pleased to see that you got some, I guess, what passes for bipartisanship in the opening remarks this morning. I appreciate your good work, and I was glad to hear even the ranking member acknowledge the spirit of bipartisanship you're bringing to this work. We just had to suffer a few little backhanded, snarky things, but by the standards of this Congress, it's a good tone, and I'm glad to be doing some bipartisan work on this agenda today. Thank you for including my bill, H.R. 4178, to extend the authority to collect Shasta Trinity Marina fees. I'd also like to thank Representative LaMalfa, Senator Feinstein for partnering with me on this effort. I'm looking forward to hearing from the witness from my district, Mr. Paul Hooser, because he's got an important role on this issue. He's the general manager for the Trinity Public Utilities District and has been working closely with us on this bill. Shasta Trinity National Recreation Area is 246,000 acres. It's a destination for outdoor recreation on the Shasta Trinity, Lewiston, and Whiskeytown lakes, located in the Shasta Trinity National Forest in Northern California. Over 3.5 million people come there every year to fish and camp and swim, to paddle and do other boating, backpacking, mountain biking. It is a recreational paradise. And as a significant tourism destination, the Shasta Trinity Recreation Area is a central economic driver in the local economy. And that has never been truer than right now. People have sought refuge in the outdoors throughout the pandemic. And so as our country opens up and travel becomes safe again, it's important to recognize that. This recreation area is managed by the U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service. Through marina fees, the Shasta Trinity National Recreation Area has been able to invest in recreation improvements, things like boat ramp improvements, boating and water safety, public service announcements, increasing access to the lakes for people with disabilities, floating restrooms, interpretive educational programs, and more. And these marina fees have paid for fire prevention patrols. They support 15 permanent and 9 seasonal employees that make recreation possible in this area. So my bill would extend the authority of the Department of Agriculture to collect and retain these marina fees at the Shasta Trinity National Recreation Area. It would go through fiscal year 2027. This fee retention was first authorized in fiscal year 2008 in the appropriations bill, and it was extended in fiscal year 2014 and has provided in the range of $500,000 to $1.5 million annually. The authorization expired in 2019, though, and we've been fortunate to extend it through annual appropriations, but we need certainty, and that's what this authorization would provide. Through fiscal year 2027, this will go a long way toward providing the certainty that planners need so that they can do the work on the ground to ensure a reliable funding stream for future recreation projects. Trinity County is overwhelmingly federal public land, and it depends on this national recreation area for its economy. So it's critical that we extend this authority to collect marina fees and continue the important work that they are supporting. I want to thank the subcommittee again for allowing me to participate today and for considering this bipartisan legislation. I look forward to the testimony from the administration and our invited witness, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Huffman. The chair now recognizes, gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Herrera Butler. She is with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Fulcher and members of the committee. This is an incredibly important day for Skamania County, which is a county I have been in Congress now for several years. Today, we're discussing a bill I introduced called the Wind River Administrative Site Conveyance Act. Mr. Chairman, you already introduced that. It's going to provide an enormous benefit to the folks who call Skamania home, and here's why. 80% of the land in Skamania County is owned by the federal government, and that's not all. So the state owns, I think, another 8 or so percent, and then private timber comprising much of the rest, leaving about 1.8% of the land in Skamania County available to be taxed at full market value. So in terms of tax receipts to pay for things like roads and schools and police and fire protection, the county has been severely hindered. Not to mention, it's been there have been so many burdens with regard to just maintaining the federal lands that have actually come down onto the county. So this bill will convey ownership of about 23 acres of the former Wind River Nursery from U.S. Forest Service to Skamania County. And it is really important to note that this proposal is supported by Skamania County and by the U.S. Forest Service. The Gimper-Pinto National Forest, which encompasses a majority of Skamania County, is currently facing tens of millions of dollars in deferred maintenance. And so by conveying the land to the county, the Forest Service is going to shed that financial responsibility associated with the maintenance of all the buildings and the facilities on the Wind River Nursery. And it's a real win-win for the county because it helps the county develop recreational, historical, and business opportunities that are going to draw in tourism to an amazing area and revenue, which will substantially benefit the citizens of Skamania County. There is nothing more humbling than going into a place where they have to provide for schools, public schools, and fire and police, and talking to those leaders, the superintendent and to others. They don't know how they're going to pay for it. And so this helps that cause. So with that, I'm really grateful for you allowing me to speak. I'm not a member of this committee. It's a real honor, Chairman, and for your willingness to move this bill. I'm so pleased that Skamania County Commissioner Tom Lannon is here today, and I am really looking forward to his testimony. So with that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Thank you, Ms. Herrera Butler. We're grateful that you're here and happy to consider your bill. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Thank you so much, Chairman, and also Ranking Member, for holding this hearing today to address the many different aspects of how our public lands affect our communities. I'm really pleased that we are going to be discussing the challenges faced by the land grant communities in my beautiful state, because our land grants, as you will hear today, are part of our herencia, part of our heritage, part of our cultura, part of our culture. I'm really going to look forward to Arturo Archuleta's testimony, who represents the New Mexico Land Grant Council. I often mention that I can trace my ancestry back 17 generations in New Mexico. But my ancestors lived in New Mexico on land grants, what we also call mercedes, that Spain and later Mexico granted to those living in what we now call the American Southwest. A long time ago, these were granted between the 17th and 19th centuries. These land grants were often community and sometimes individual grants. The land grants included tracts of communal land that were essential. We have a beautiful, but it's an arid landscape in New Mexico. So the river bottom land wasn't enough. You also needed to make sure you were able to get access to the mountain land for grazing, to collect firewood, and very important, to be able to pull the water down from those mountain streams in what we call acequias to give nourishment to your crops. After the Mexican-American War, Mexico ceded more than half of its territory to the United States. And something you will often hear talked about in New Mexico is the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And people look to that Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo because it promised, the United States promised in that treaty, that the land and property rights of those now living in the American Southwest would be honored, that they would be protected. Sadly, that wasn't the case. Instead, the federal government confiscated millions of acres of land that had belonged previously to tribes, pueblos, and Nuevo Mexicanos. In our arid region, the loss of the communal land, the loss of that access to those grazing pastures and the forest jeopardized these historic community survival. For centuries, however, New Mexicans have maintained that dedication to the land and living in the places they love. However, there's also been this historic and constant struggle with the federal agencies that now have the forests and the grazing areas, and oftentimes even, cemeteries or historic cemeteries are in these now federal lands. But in recent decades, it's gotten a lot better. There have been great superintendents that have worked with the land grant councils, but we do not want to leave it up to individuals who are sensitive and have a good relationship with the local communities. We want to make sure that this becomes law. So my bill, the Land Grant Mercedes Traditional Use Recognition Consultation Act, would actually solidify the importance of that consultation so it doesn't depend on that initiative of individuals. It would require consultation between the federal government and land grant communities in New Mexico on public lands management in those areas where you can say this used to be a land grant. And it will also eliminate the disconnect that federal agencies sometimes have with traditional communities, and it'll help the land grant communities access the resources they need to not just survive, but thrive. So I'm looking forward to, I think, a new era of cooperation that will happen once we pass this land grant, a new era of cooperation between the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. It is going to allow the land grants to reestablish and have recognized their historic boundaries and provide them with the pathways and the connections that they need so that they can appropriately have recognition of spiritual and cultural sites that are there, but also providing the tools so that they can access the lands they need. So I look forward to the testimony today, and thank you for giving me this time to describe the bill.
The gentlewoman yields back. Thank you for being here. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi. Mr. Garamendi, I believe you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Good. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to present my bill, the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument Expansion Act, H.R. 6366. It would expand the national monument designated in 2015 by President Obama to include approximately 3,925 acres of federal land in Lake County, California, an area I currently represent. It also encourages new voluntary co-management between the federal land management agencies, the BLM and the Forest Service, and federally recognized tribes in the area. And thirdly, it renames the Walker Ridge in Lake County, which is the area, the 3,900 acres, to Buluk, which is the native language, the Patwin language for Condor Ridge. So the renaming of the area is the third part of the bill. I want to thank Congressman Mike Thompson, who carried the original legislation, and Congressman Huffman, both of whom are co-sponsoring this legislation. I also want to thank the Anthony Roberts, who will be speaking later on this bill. He is the tribal chairman of the Ochydihe of Wintu National Tribe, located nearby this area. The Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument Act as introduced, reflects a 60-day public comment period during which my office received over 200 comments supporting the proposed national monument, the expansion, and just one comment opposed to it. My bill is endorsed by local elected officials in Lake County, the Board of Supervisors, the Tribal Council of the Ochydihe of Wintu Nation, as well as a number of non-government organizations, including the Sierra Club, the California Wilderness Coalition, California Native Plant Society, and Tuolumne, a nonprofit that has been spearheaded the effort over the last decade for the national monument. Also, a good deal of local individual community activity, off-the-road recreational vehicle enthusiasts have also expressed support for the bill. Condor Ridge, presently known as Walker Ridge, is an extinct volcanic mountain range with unusual serpentine soil composition that then supports a very rare plant species in the area, such as the adobe lily, found only in this part of Northern California. The federally protected wildlife, such as the bald eagle, the golden eagle, the Thule elk, and others make their home here. In the 114th Congress, I had the privilege of joining then Senator Barbara Boxer, Congressman Mike Thompson, in introducing bicameral legislation to establish the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument, which originally included the Walker Ridge tract that now is covered in this bill. For reasons having to do with the potential for wind farm in the area, the Walker Ridge was excluded. The wind farm is not going to happen, and therefore we are open the opportunity to include what should have been included in the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument. In 2014, then Secretary of Interior Sally Jewell came to the area where she could view the landscape, listen to the local communities and tribal leaders about the need for the area to be conserved, and she found it to be worthy, and then set in process the motion that eventually led to the presidential declaration in 2015 with the proclamation 9298, which then designated the federal land in the area as the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument. As I said before, the monument would expand the boundary by 3,925 acres, which includes all of the former Walker Ridge. When this legislation passes, it will be the Condor Ridge. And it requires that the federal agencies get on with establishing the management plan for the area. It's been 6 years and it hasn't been completed, so we give them a good swift kick. Mr. Huffman, you can join us in the necessary boot to the necessary places to get it moving along. I think we pretty much run my course and my time. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We thank you, Mr. Garamendi. The chair will now recognize Mr. Johnson, if he has joined us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's an honor to be able to talk about my bill today, the Gilt Edge Mine Conveyance Act. And I'll start by noting that the state of South Dakota and the local governments in the area are supportive of this legislation, and it would authorize the sale of 266 acres of federal land within the Gilt Edge Mine Superfund site of the state of South Dakota. So I'll start with a little bit of history. Between 1992 and 1997, the Brome Mining Company conducted open pit gold mining at the Gilt Edge Mine. This is the location we're talking about. And that company filed for bankruptcy in July of 1999, and that left the state with 150 million gallons of heavy metal laden water in 3 open pits, as well as an unreclaimed heap leach pad and a 60-acre waste rock dump. And so shortly thereafter, Governor Janklow of South Dakota took over the site and used state funds to keep the site environmentally safe for a year. Then the federal government, through EPA, came in. They assumed the water treatment and ultimately listed that site as a federal Superfund site. Now, the state of South Dakota is perfectly capable of dealing with all of this environmental remediation. They are able and willing to do so. Their ability to do that is limited by the fact that portions of this site are owned, that this land is owned by the federal government. So this bill would convey the land to the state so that they can finish the remediation process. Now, I want to assure the committee that this bill would not mean any real loss of ability or opportunity for the federal taxpayer or to the Forest Service. This land now doesn't support the Forest Service's mission. It's got no realistic public use. You're not going to grow timber there. It's not great deer habitat. We can't allow people to recreate in this area. It does need to be environmentally managed, but it does not have any public benefit. So offloading the land will reduce the Forest Service's Superfund liabilities. It relieves USFS from Superfund interactions. And it really does provide a cost-effective way to manage, protect, and maintain the Superfund cleanup remedies. And as a result, the federal government and the state of South Dakota would both be better off. They would be well served rather by this land transfer. So I'll end where I started. Governor Noem is supportive of this effort. Lawrence County is supportive. The city of Lead is supportive. The city of Deadwood is supportive. And I'm also excited that we've got Secretary Hunter Roberts from the state of South Dakota, who's going to be here and will be able to provide more details on the bill. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Before we proceed with the second witness panel, I'd ask unanimous consent that any member participating today be granted the ability to question witnesses, or rather, any member testifying be allowed to participate and question witnesses today. Without objection, so ordered. We'll now move on to panel 2. Thank you to the sponsoring members of Congress for their valuable testimony, and as stated, you'll have the opportunity to question the witnesses if you so choose. We'll now transition to our second panel. As with the first panel, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will be made part of the hearing record. When you begin, the timer will start, and it'll turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining, and red when your time has expired. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. The chair will now recognize Mr. Greg Smith, Director of Lands and Realty Management for the Forest Service.
Good morning, Chairman Goose and Ranking Member Fulcher and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide the perspective of the USDA Forest Service on 5 public lands bills for consideration today. Our national forests and grasslands are critical to the well-being of our nation. They offer some of the most readily available outdoor recreation settings in the country. Public use of national forests has increased continually. In 2020, we saw vegetation levels of American sought refuge from relaxation from the outdoors because of the pandemic, the COVID-19. So in 2020, we saw 18 million visits over what we had in 2019. USDA is committed to working with our state, federal, tribal, and traditional community partners. The bills that I'm speaking to about today highlight our positive working relationships and our commitment to collaboration and transparency to address the unique needs of our local communities. The Gilt Edge Mine Conveyance Act conveys approximately 266 acres of national forest land administered by the Black Hills National Forest with Gilt Edge Mine Superfund boundary to the state of South Dakota. USDA supports consolidating the ownership in and around Gilt Mine Edge. The conveyance simplifies remediation of the Superfund site by consolidating land ownership to the state of South Dakota, who has jurisdiction and oversight. HR 4178 would convey the authority to retain and use collected fees for the Shasta Trinity Marina to fund the Shasta Trinity National Recreation Area. That authority was first included in the 2008 Appropriations Act and has been subsequently reauthorized over the past years to the present day. The funds have been used to meet critical health and safety standards, address portions of the maintenance backlog, construct accessible facilities to provide greater access for persons with disabilities, among other things that the recreation area has done. USDA supports the bill to extend the authority for 5 more years through September 30th, 2027. The Wind River Administrative Site Conveyance Act conveys parcels totaling just about 24 acres of National Forest System lands on the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest to Skamania County in the state of Washington. In 2001, a legislative land exchange transferred ownership of 187 acres to Skamania County. The USDA supports this bill where Skamania County would require the remaining facilities of lands of the Wind River Administrative Site. The Land Grant Mercedes Traditional Use Recognition and Consultation Act provides for consultation between the USDA and the governing bodies of the Land Grant Mercedes when developing written guidance as required by the bill. The bill applies to specific communities exclusive to the southwestern United States, many of which are surrounded by and rely on federal lands managed by the Forest Service. USDA recognized the significance of addressing the unique and important historical and cultural settings of northern New Mexico. The word consultation, as it pertains to federal agencies, has a specific meaning when relating to federally recognized Indian tribes. While the Forest Service strives for better collaboration and cooperation with our traditional communities, the term consultation, as used with respect to federally recognized tribes, cannot be applied to this work with Land Grant Mercedes. Land Grant Mercedes are recognized as cooperators in the forest planning process. These plans serve as enduring commitments by the Forest Service to the communities of northern New Mexico. The Forest Service is committed to collaboration and transparency that addresses the unique needs of our local communities. USDA supports the bill. However, we would like to work with the bill sponsors and the subcommittee to differentiate the work from our relationship with federally recognized tribes and land grant communities. Finally, the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument Expansion Act expands the boundaries of the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument to include Walker Ridge, which is approximately 3,925 acres of federal land administered by the U.S. Department of Interior Bureau of Land Management in Lake County, California. USDA is committed to our partnership with the Department of Interior and the BLM management, affected Indian tribes, local communities in managing this unique resource. To accomplish this intent of the act and to ensure that we have a comprehensive and updated management plan with tribal consultation, USDA would like to work with the bill sponsors and the subcommittee to address specific concerns regarding the extending timeline to update the plan. That concludes my remarks on these bills. I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. The chair now recognizes Mr. Mark Lambrecht, Assistant Director of the National Landscape Conservation System for the Bureau of Land Management.
Thank you, Chairman Neguse, Ranking Member Fulcher, and members of the subcommittee. As the chairman stated, my name is Mark Lambrecht. I'm Assistant Director for the National Conservation Lands and Community Partnerships Directorate in the Bureau of Land Management. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the BLM on HR 5493, the Land Grant Mercedes Traditional Use Recognition Consultation Act, and HR 6366, the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument Expansion Act. The BLM supports these bills and looks forward to working with the sponsors and subcommittee on them further. BLM manages approximately 245 million surface acres located primarily in 12 western states and mineral resources across 700 million subsurface acres. Under our multiple use and sustained yield mandate directed by Congress, BLM manages public lands for a broad range of uses, including renewable and conventional energy development, as well as livestock grazing, timber production, hunting and fishing, recreation, and conservation, including protection of cultural and historical resources. BLM continues to carry out this mandate while supporting Secretary Howland's priorities to build healthy communities and economies, advance environmental justice, and provide safe and equitable access to the outdoors for all Americans. HR 5493 provides for enhanced communication between the federal government and communal land grant entities in New Mexico called Land Grant Mercedes. The bill requires the Department of the Interior and the USDA, in consultation with the New Mexico Land Grant Council, qualified land grant Mercedes, and Indian tribes to develop written guidance that would describe the historical traditional uses, such as gathering wood products and herbs, that a community user or qualified land grant Merced may conduct for non-commercial use. The guidance would also address the activities that would require a federal permit, the permissible uses of motorized, non-motorized, and mechanized vehicles, and outlines the process for infrastructure improvements. Further, the bill directs the Department of Interior and USDA to consider historic traditional uses during the land use planning process. BLM understands the importance of working closely with the New Mexico Land Grant Mercedes and appreciates the cultural and historical role they have played and continue to play throughout New Mexico. We support HR 5493, which aligns with the administration's priorities outlined in Executive Order 13985, advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government, as well as the Secretary's priorities. We would also like to work with the sponsor and the subcommittee on clarifying certain definitions of the bill. HR 6366 would add approximately 3,900 acres of BLM managed land to the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument in Lake County, California. Established by Presidential Proclamation 9298 on July 10, 2015, the lands within the National Monument are some of the most scenic in Northern California. They also retain deep cultural significance for roughly 24 federally recognized Indian tribes who inhabited them for at least the last 11,000 years. Further, HR 6366 renames the area commonly known as Walker Ridge to Condor Ridge or Malok Luyok in the Patwin language. The bill also directs the BLM and the Forest Service to complete a comprehensive management plan for the monument within 1 year of enactment to expand opportunities for tribal engagement in the planning and management of the monument. HR 6366 aligns with the administration's conservation goals and commitment to ensuring that all decisions relating to federal stewardship of lands, waters, and wildlife include consideration of how to safeguard the treaty, spiritual subsistence, and cultural interests of any Indian tribes. The BLM supports this bill. BLM looks forward to continuing to work with the subcommittee and Congress on the important public land issues discussed today. We would also like to thank Representatives Ledger Fernandez and Garamendi for their leadership on these bills. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes the tribal chairman, Mr. Anthony Roberts. Mr. Roberts, you are recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Goose, Ranking Member Fulcher, and members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today. My name is Anthony Roberts. I'm the chairman of the Ochedihi Winter Nation, and I appear before you today to speak in support of HR 6366, the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument Expansion Act. The Ochedihi Winter Nation is a federally recognized tribal government located in rural Yolo County, northwest of Sacramento, California. Today, our lands and government are centered in Capay Valley, just to the southeast of the Walker Ridge. But our Patwin ancestors once occupied a large area that includes lands today known as the counties of Yolo, Solano, Colusa, Lake, and Napa, including both Walker Ridge and the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument more generally. The Ochedihi Winter Nation has a long and significant connection to Walker Ridge, which is steeped in thousands of years of rich history and is profoundly meaningful to the Patwin people. Elements of the natural landscape on the ridge have traditional cultural significance to us and include areas where religious ceremonies are practiced and sites that are central to our people's origin stories. We have provided detailed information in our written comments, but in my remarks today, I would like to concentrate on two issues of central importance to Ochedihi. First, we ratify that the bill, if enacted, for Walker Ridge as Molok Loyuk, which means Condor Ridge in our language. By creating this designation, Congress will recognize both the historic habitat of the condors and the cultural significance of this area to indigenous peoples. The other item we would like to highlight is the unique approach this bill takes to provide for cooperative stewardship or cooperative management, if you will. Proper management is necessary to provide the one-of-a-kind cultural and natural resources at Molok Loyuk, while at the same time ensuring the availability of recreational opportunities for sightseers, mountain bikers, hikers, off-highway vehicle users, campers, and equestrians. HR 6366 directs the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Services in consultation with affected federally recognized Indian tribes like Ochedihi to develop a management plan that makes use of the federal authority to enter cooperative and collaborative tribal partnerships. This co-stewardship provision is extremely important to us. First of all, it requires responsible federal agencies to complete a management plan for the monument. Although the monument was originally designated back in 2015, there is no monument management plan currently in place. Second, HR 6366 ensures that tribal knowledge, perspective, and practices will be part of the monument's management going forward. That makes sense after all the areas unique cultural resources and history were among the original reasons for its protection. Third, the co-stewardship provides HR 6366 represent an important opportunity for innovation while also remaining firmly grounded in federal law and policy. We think the approach taken in the bill will preserve and maintain the cultural values of the area, while at the same time ensuring that the general public will also continue to enjoy the benefits of this area. Put simply, we believe that this type of management best serves the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument communities. With our long history in this area, we have unique perspective on how the land should be managed, and we are willing to apply our historic practices with modern technologies to ensure that Walker Ridge is preserved and healthy, a place for all to enjoy. In addition to requiring the creation of a plan to ensure appropriate protection, restoration, and management of this treasured area, HR 6366 would provide cultural protections to Native American cultural resources, to traditional sacred sites and trails. We greatly appreciate Congressman Garamendi's leadership in protecting this area that has cultural significance to all Patwin people, other Northern California tribes, and those committed to serving native habitats and wildlife. He has worked closely with not only Yoshadihi, but other tribes in the area, local conservation groups like Tuliomi and the California Native Plant Society, as well as national conservation groups like the Sierra Club, bringing this legislation together. For all these reasons, the Yoshadihi Wintun Nation wholeheartedly supports this legislation. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. The gentleman yields back. I want to thank all the witnesses for their valuable testimony, reminding members that Committee Rule 3, subparagraph D, imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chair will now recognize members for any questions that they may wish to ask the witnesses. I'd like to start by recognizing the ranking member, Mr. Fulcher, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the panel for providing such good information. And I'd like to just start with a question for Mr. Smith. And this, Mr. Smith, this has to do with just your assessment of the Forest Service capacity for management. And as you know, I'm from a Western state, and over the last year, we lost about 7 million acres to wildfire. And our mutual friend, Chief Randy Moore, has consistently recognized the need to significantly increase the pace and scale of forest management in these fire-prone areas. And that's why the Forest Service recently announced a 10-year strategy to combat wildfire. So with that as kind of a background, how many acres do you feel like you've got the capacity to plan and treat over the next year? And are there any shovel-ready projects that are underway?
Congressman, that is certainly something out of the realm of my expertise, but I would certainly speak with the agency to make sure we get you the appropriate answer to that. That is more of a forest management issue.
Please do that. And I thought that you had some good background on that front. Let me move to another question then, and this is in regard to the impact of what national monument status does to efforts to manage the property. And so we've been talking about HR 6366, and that would add about 4,000 acres to the Lake Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument. It's already got 330,000 acres there now. And so of the last 6 years, 5 of those years have experienced catastrophic wildfire. If this is transitioned into a national monument status, how does that impact the Forest Service ability to manage activities within those monument areas?
We think that the current land management plan that we have in place will be sufficient to manage wildfire and other management activities that we have. But for the new addition, I would certainly defer to BLM, since they're going to have management responsibilities for that.
So let's just do that. Mr. Lambrecht, would you like to take a shot at that? Mr. Lambrecht, you might be muted.
I apologize, Congressman. Thank you for the reminder, and thank you for the question. So the additional 3,900 acres comprise parcels that are kind of in a linear feature and would actually block up the lands within the national monument and also enhance management of an area of critical environmental concern and some other acres that were acquired through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So the bill would actually enhance management strategy for the existing national monument.
And so you don't see the restrictions on access and process as being hindered at all if that shifts over to the national monument status when it comes to wildfire management or prevention?
So CAL FIRE is responsible for management of fire in the area. And so this would not change their strategies. And our understanding and communication with them is that this would not be a negative impact should the legislation go forward.
Mr. Lambrecht, I would just encourage you to check again, because I think that will greatly hinder. And I think that anyone who honestly looks at that will recognize that hindrance. But just while we're on the topic, one last question before I run out of time for you. This was designated by President Obama back during his tenure, who designated about 550 million acres into national monuments during his tenure. This portion was not included by his administration. Why do you suspect that this was not included in President Obama's designation, but the attempt is to do so now?
And thank you for the question, Congressman. So I suspect what you're getting at there is there was a proposed wind development in these parcels, and the Bureau recently issued a decision denying the application for that wind development. For there was some insufficient information provided on behalf of the developer, and also there's incompatibility with the area for critical environmental concern that I mentioned earlier, and also lands that were acquired through Land and Water Conservation Fund, and also potential impacts to California condor. And so as I mentioned, that decision has been issued, and through communication with a lot of local stakeholders, tribes, and other interested parties in the area, it was recommended that the Bureau move forward with the additional 3,900 acres.
Thank you, Mr. Lambrecht. Mr. Smith, thank you. We're out of time. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Ms. Leger-Fernandez. And if Ms. Leger-Fernandez is not with us, oh, no, she is. There she is.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much. I wanted to get to the issue, that we heard today and, just heard with regards to defining consultation. And I do understand that we are not trying to have the same definition of consultation that exists in the executive order regarding consultation with Indian tribes, which has very specific timelines and is unique to the fact that there is tribal sovereignty. But I do think that we all agree that one of the problems my bill is trying to fix is the fact that the Forest Service, the BLM, says we can't consult with you because there is nothing in there that says we must. And so we're trying to address that. And I think the ordinary meaning of consultation is and would include that there was meaningful and timely input by the land grants and the development of policies, that there would be that conversation and communication before you adopt things. And I think what's clear, I'm very open to getting specific language of, codifying in a sense what consultation means with regards to land grants. But let me ask this of our experts, and I'd ask each of you to answer with an yes or no of whether you agree that increased consultation in that sort of commonplace understanding of what it means and advance notice of changes to management plans would lead to a more collaborative, a more meaningful relationship between the federal government and land grant communities. Mr. Lambrecht, would you agree that that's a good thing?
Thank you, Congresswoman. So the first question that you asked is our interpretation of consultation. And so I would advise that formal consultation, government to government, relationships is spelled out in the Constitution, federal statutes, executive orders, and it differs from, I think, what this bill seeks to establish, which is written guidance for land managers to follow for early and regular communication between Federal Land Management Agency and the land grant Mercedes. So that's certainly something that we support. Conversations about historical uses or other interests of the land grant Mercedes in federal land management, and would also advise that this is something that we're doing already. We have a liaison from the Bureau that meets regularly with the New Mexico Land Grant Council and the land grant Mercedes about some of these issues, and we look forward to this legislation further enhancing that relationship.
Thank you. Rick, do you agree that, I'll ask our other witness, do you agree that that collaboration and communication in advance of would be helpful and useful in terms of the relationship between land grants and the federal agencies who are now have sovereignty and jurisdiction over former land grants?
Congressman, yes, the Forest Service certainly agrees with that. And in terms of spirit, I think we like to do that in practice. So I think we have a great start. We have great relationships with the community. And like I said, the only hiccup was the term of art is consultation as to what that's traditionally mean. But in terms of spirit of what your bill is doing, the Forest Service certainly agrees that that's a good thing.
Thank you, and I look forward to working on refining specifically what consultation means within this context. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair will now recognize Mr. Tiffany if he is on, and if not, we're going to be a little bit flexible today. As we know, there are competing hearings. We will recognize instead Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore is not available. We will go to Ms. Harrell.
Thank you. Let me make sure my volume is good.
We can hear you.
Oh, super. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and witnesses. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to ask a question to Mr. Smith, but I just, talking about our federal land management, the agencies have identified a combined total of 117 million acres at high or very high wildfire potential, representing nearly 1/5 of the combined federal lands administered by the agencies. And at the same time, the Forest Service has only been able to complete fueling treatments on roughly 2 to 3 million acres. And speaking from the district I represent, we know how cumbersome it is to be able to mitigate or fight fire, especially on wilderness lands, such as the Little Bear Fire that we had some years back. But my question is to Mr. Smith, what types of fire mitigation treatments can the Forest Service do in national monuments and wilderness areas?
Congressman, that is certainly something that unfortunately is not in my expertise, but I will certainly make sure that I get back to the appropriate person to answer that question. I know we have our chief who is very interested in that, and I know we're doing a lot of mitigation thing. Unfortunately, that is certainly not in the area that I'm expertise in.
Okay, and I appreciate that honesty, and I'll make sure that our staff is aware that you're going to be responding, because the follow-up question that I had would be, adding additional acreage under monument and wilderness designations, such as HR 6366. The impact, I'm concerned about what the impacts will be, and how this will, pushing to increase the amount of acreage in terms of treatments. And so if you could certainly have your office reach out to mine, I'd really appreciate it, because certainly what we want to do is protect our natural resources and so forth, but we want to be able to protect the communities that live in and around, and also the industries that are conducive to our natural resources. So I really appreciate that, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. And thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Huffman. And if Mr. Huffman is no longer with us, the chair will recognize Mr. Garamendi. Mr. Garamendi is not with us, and so I believe, Unless there are any other Democratic members of the committee, we'll proceed back to the minority. Hearing none, we will recognize Mr. Obernolte, who's been waiting patiently.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, I'd like to follow up on the line of questioning that Ranking Member Fulcher and Ms. Harrell were pursuing as regards the designation of the 330,000 acres. Can you tell us what the fire activity on that territory has been over the last few years? I mean, that's part of my home state of California. It's something that we're deeply concerned about. So obviously, a change in designation is something that we want to make sure we're considering how fire prone that area is, and that we're not imperiling the ability to fight fires on that land.
So, Congressman, I again, I apologize for that not being my expertise, but I can certainly, I've got the understanding of what you guys are wanting to find out, and certainly I will make sure that my leadership understands what the question is, and I get back to you that, particularly when it comes to fire. I know the chief is very involved in that, Chief Moore, and so let me get back to that, and I'll certainly answer your question, but I just don't have the expertise to answer that question.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is, those of us that represent that part of the country, this is really front of mind for us, just because California has experienced such severe wildfire activity over the last couple of years, particularly last year, as I'm sure you know, was the worst year for wildfire in the entire history of the state. And we just want to make absolutely certain that changing that designation isn't going to make matters worse from the standpoint of our ability to fight those fires. Let me ask you, since we don't know specifically about the acreage that we're talking about, in general, can we talk a little bit about the U.S. Forest Service approach to wilderness and monument designations for those lands, and whether or not we might need a new classification of wilderness that better allows forest management and fire protection within that federal land?
I think that's something that's always open for discussion. We're having lots of discussions about that, but I can't say that we've come to any conclusion. Certainly, that would be something we would have to consult with the administration about. But at this point, I just know that's been discussions, but we haven't made any or haven't given any direction to do anything particular that I know of.
Okay, well, I'd like to encourage you to have those discussions, because I mean, we're all on the same team here, right? We want good federal management of our public lands. We want the ability to fight fires on those public lands if it's in the interest of good forest management and in the interest of protecting the property of our constituents. And there's been a lot of frustration on this topic, and I think that there's reasonable minds can disagree, but I think that there's enough of a consensus that there's a broad kind of bipartisan room for either modification to the existing rules or a new classification for land that might facilitate our ability to manage that federal forest. So I'd like to encourage you to have those discussions.
Will do. Certainly look forward to it.
Great. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. I believe that we have no further members to participate in this particular part of the hearing, and so we will, absent any other statements from folks, I'm just looking here at the grid to make sure we're not missing anybody. I think we are prepared to go to the next panel. So thank you to the witnesses for their valuable testimony. We appreciate you taking the time, and certainly the members for their questions. We will now transition into the third panel. As with the first two panels, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will be made part of the hearing record. When you begin, the timer will start and it will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining and red when your time has expired. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. I'll also allow the entire panel to testify before questioning the witnesses. The chair now recognizes Mr. Hunter Roberts, Secretary of the South Dakota Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, subcommittee members. My name is Hunter Roberts, and I am the Secretary of the South Dakota Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you today. I'm here today to testify in support of the Gilt Mine Conveyance Act, which seeks to authorize the sale of approximately 266 acres of federal land within the Gilt Edge Mine Superfund site located in the Black Hills, southeast of Leeds, South Dakota. Between 1992 and 1997, the Brome Mining Company conducted open pit gold mining at the Gilt Edge Mine. The Brome Mining Company filed for bankruptcy on July 29, 1999, leaving the state with 150 million gallons of heavy metal-laden water in 3 open pits, an unreclaimed heap leach pad, and a 60-acre waste rock dump. From July 1999 through August of 2000, South Dakota Governor Janklow stepped in and took over the site using state funds to keep the site environmentally safe for a year. In August 2000, EPA assumed water treatment activities at the site and ultimately listed the site as a federal Superfund site in December. EPA continues to lead the cleanup actions at the site today. Under the federal Superfund law, South Dakota is required to provide a 10% match on EPA's cleanup cost, and once cleanup is complete, the state will be responsible for 100% of the operation and maintenance costs to collect and treat water at the site into perpetuity. In short, once cleanup actions are complete, the state must assure EPA it can and will indefinitely maintain the cleanup remedies put in place along with institutional controls implemented during the cleanup. Institutional controls, such as site security, access limitations, or deed restrictions, are difficult to implement on property you do not own. Therefore, the best way for South Dakota to meet this requirement is to own the property within the Gilt Edge Mine Superfund site boundary. With that in mind, since 2001, South Dakota has been acquiring land within the site boundary to enable Superfund cleanup and to meet its long-term assurances to EPA. The Department of Justice, EPA, and the state of South Dakota work cooperatively to acquire property through settlement agreements with former owners and operators at the site and to conduct cleanup actions. The EPA supports the state's plan to acquire the Forest Service property. There is a total of 1,328 acres within the Superfund site boundary, and to date, South Dakota has acquired 977 of them, approximately 74%. This brings us to the need for the Gilt Edge Mine Conveyance Acts. There are 266 acres of U.S. Forest Service property located within the Gilt Edge Mine Superfund site boundary. The Act authorizes the sale of those acres from the federal government to the state of South Dakota. Specifically, the Act states if South Dakota conducts an appraisal of the properties in accordance with the Uniform Appraisal Standards of Federal Land Acquisitions and the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, and based on the findings of the appraisal submits a market value offer to the Forest Service to acquire the 266 acres, the Forest Service will convey the land to South Dakota. In addition, the bill says that any proceeds received by the Forest Service from the conveyance shall be deposited and made available to the Forest Service for maintenance and improvement of land or facilities in the Black Hills National Forest in South Dakota. Although it is a relatively simple bill, it creates significant benefits for both the state and the federal government. First, it relieves the Forest Service from any potential Superfund liabilities that could come from owning property within the boundaries of the listed Superfund site. Second, it improves site security by giving the state control over most of the property within the site boundary, which allows a single government agency to control site access, and it creates state-owned buffer space between private property and the in-place remedies and water treatment facilities. Third, by maintaining control of the property within the site boundary, the state minimizes the potential for incompatible land uses that could cause water quality degradation or increase contaminant exposure. Fourth, it provides the state with additional land for expansion of water collection and treatment facilities as future needs dictate. And finally, acquisition of the Forest Service property puts the state in the best position to assure EPA and any institutional controls established as part of the Superfund cleanup will remain in place after EPA leaves the site and the state takes over long-term site responsibility. It was also important for us to make sure our neighbors, the cities of Deadwood and Lead and Lawrence County, understood and supported this legislation. In July 2020, myself, DA&R staff, and the Commissioner of the South Dakota Office of School and Public Lands met with officials from Deadwood, Lead, and Lawrence County to discuss this issue. In the end, all 3 entities submitted letters of support to South Dakota's congressional delegation. We are grateful for their support and their desire to help ensure the site is managed in the best way possible moving forward. In summary, the Gilt Edge Mine Conveyance Act is a common sense piece of legislation allowing the state of South Dakota to purchase 266 acres of Forest Service property located within the Gilt Edge Mine Superfund site. By doing this, the state puts itself in the best position to assure EPA and the public it has the tools in place to safely manage the Superfund site moving forward. I urge your support of the Gilt Edge Mines Conveyance Act and will stand by for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Huffman to introduce his witness, and I believe Mr. Huffman might be on a competing hearing. So perhaps if committee staff could contact Mr. Huffman, we'll skip to the next witness and then give him, Mr. Huffman, an opportunity to introduce the witness following Mr. Lannon's testimony. So with that, the chair now recognizes Mr. Tom Lannon, District 2 Commissioner of Skamania County, Washington State.
Chairman Nagus, Ranking Member Fulcher, and members of the committee. My name is Tom Lannon, a County Commissioner from Skamania County, Washington. Skamania County is a rural community, about 12,000 people, 45 minutes east of Portland, Oregon. We are in the corner of Southwest Washington State. Our community serves as the state's gateway to the Columbia River Gorge.
Mr. Commissioner, apologies for interrupting. I just want to make sure, I'm not sure if you're planning on turning on your video, but just want to make sure that you have the, if that was your intent, that you're able to do so.
All right. This could be scary. All right, I'm sorry.
You can proceed.
Our community serves as Washington State's gateway to the Columbia River Gorge, which offers stunning and amazing natural landscapes that are protected by the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area. With that comes significant restrictions on development for substantial portions of our private lands. Within the community, there are only 3 small urban areas that are exempt from the Gorge Act's land use protections. 80% of the county is within the National Forest, the Gifford-Pinchot. Another 18% is in state and private forests that are exempt from property taxes. And so we have about 1.8% of the county that generates any income for a flow of property tax revenue to support public safety, schools, and other government services. Historically, the community has relied on the timber industry to sustain it, which provided family wage jobs to generations of Skamania County families. The industry began to rapidly decline, pardon me, with the Endangered Species Act listing of the northern spotted owl in 1990. That, coupled with the implementation of the Gorge Act, jobs for families and revenues for local government services began to disappear in Skamania County. These are serious challenges my community has struggled with over the past several decades. And while our work continues to diversify our economy, the reality is that these revenues may never be fully recovered, which is what brings me to the committee today. I am asking your support for Congresswoman Herrera Butler's Wind River Administrative Site Conveyance Act, which will help continue efforts to repurpose an abandoned Forest Service administrative site into something that is a win-win for both the agency and my community. To provide some historical context, in the early 20th century, the Forest Service established 3 administrative sites in the county, one being the Wind River Nursery. It was the first Forest Service nursery, and it was established to replant forests burned by wildfires. The 3 administrative sites were active for nearly 90-some years. In the late 90s, changing Forest Service priorities led to the closure of the Wind River site, and with it a loss of approximately 300 seasonal and full-time jobs. This was another blow to my community's economy, and since its closure, many of the structures at the Wind River site have fallen into deferred maintenance status and a state of disrepair. So recognizing the Forest Service no longer had a use for or the resources to adequately maintain the nursery site, coupled with our county's need and desire to create economic development activities, a collaborative effort was initiated to create a new use for the site and also honor its historic roots. In 2000, with congressional approval, the Forest Service conveyed 187 acres of the site to the county. The agency also entered into several long-term agreements with Skamania County that enabled local dollars to maintain and restore many of the structures. These allowed the Forest Service to responsibly reduce its maintenance backlog while providing the county with ways to grow its economy and its tax revenue. Basically a win-win. Today, in partnership with a local nonprofit consisting of retired Forest Service employees, the county has made considerable and meaningful progress towards restoring the site. At the county's expense, these efforts include infrastructure upgrades to the site's water mains, improvements to the electrical system, and full restoration of 2 residential structures, with 5 more planned. These structures would have fallen into an increased state of disrepair had it not been for the efforts and the collaboration between groups. So these buildings have been restored, leased, they're generating revenue, and the county is committing to reinvesting that revenue back into restoration. So passage of the Conveyance Act will provide the county with an additional 23 acres on the site and enable us to continue our restoration efforts. So with that, I thank you for your time this morning and consideration of this legislation, which will give my community and the opportunity to strengthen our fragile economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Huffman to introduce his witness.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the courtesy of allowing me to introduce Mr. Paul Hooser. Paul is the general manager of the Trinity Public Utility District based in Weaverville, California. This is in Trinity County, in the northern part of my district. Trinity County is a beautiful, very rural place, and public lands and federal land in particular are just a huge part of Trinity County. The Public Utility District obviously is an important part of the local government and the services that are essential in Trinity County, but it's also a vital partner for the Forest Service and other federal agencies that are also very much a part of the community in Trinity County. Paul has been leading TPUD, as we call it in Trinity, since 2011. And a little fun fact about Paul and me, Mr. Chairman, that you might not know, we're both from the state of Missouri. I bet you didn't know that. So welcome, Paul. I look forward to hearing your testimony.
Thank you, Congressman Huffman, for that introduction. Chairman Neguse, is it okay for me to start?
Yes, you may proceed.
All right, Chairman Neguse, Ranking Member Fulcher, Congressman Huffman, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of H.R. 4178 to extend the authority to collect Shasta Trinity marina fees through fiscal year 2027. As Member Huffman introduced me, my name is Paul Hooser. I'm the General Manager for Trinity Public Utilities District. I've been the General Manager since 2011. I serve on the Board of Directors for the Trinity County Chamber of Commerce as well, and as an elected board member for the Mountain Community Healthcare District. I've served on the Trinity County Collaborative since its inception in 2013 when Secretary Vilsack helped establish that in Trinity County. And I also serve on the Recreation Subcommittee for the Trinity County Collaborative. Trinity Lake is a major source of recreation in Trinity County, as well as being the source of carbon-free renewable hydropower that Trinity PUD provides to about 85% of Trinity County residents that we serve. The marina fees that are collected for marinas on Shasta and Trinity Lakes are absolutely essential to maintaining recreation infrastructure that is extremely important to tourism in our county. You may not be aware, Trinity County is one of the poorest counties in the state of California, with 19% of the population living below the poverty line. Although the county has more land area than the state of Delaware, we only have a population of approximately 14,000 people. Though Trinity County is large, the federal government owns more than 75% of the county's land. In past decades, Trinity County saw a lot of economic activity from mining and timber harvesting, but these two industries have virtually shut down within the county. With almost no economic activity taking place on 75% of our land area, the economy is severely strained. Our schools and local governments are in a mode of perpetual cuts as they try to meet the needs of residents with continually declining revenue sources. Tourism and the money it brings to the county are critically important to our economy. The Shasta Trinity National Recreation Area is the largest driver of tourism activity in our area, with an estimated 3.5 million people visiting annually. The resorts and marinas are the foundation that support the national recreation area infrastructure necessary to allow visitors to enjoy our beautiful environment. In 2021, marina fee collections exceeded $1.5 million and paid for fire prevention patrols, regular cleaning and maintenance of restrooms, dumpsters available at shoreline campgrounds, and maintenance of 4 boat-in campgrounds. In addition, these funds paid for state-of-the-art accessible facilities to provide greater access for persons with disabilities. These fees have paid for the removal of numerous garbage dumps from national recreation area lands, bear-proof trash cans, picnic tables, fire rings, vault toilets, and benches. The marina fee collections support 15 permanent and 9 seasonal employees that provide vital support for national recreation area recreation. Over the past many years, the marina fee authorization has been reauthorized on a year-to-year basis, which makes planning and funding for improvements difficult to budget. I enthusiastically support this legislation that would bring certainty to this process through the year 2027. And I would also ask that future consideration be given to making this authorization permanent. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this legislation that it is critically important to our area, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair will now recognize Ms. Ledger Fernandez to introduce her witness.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. It is great pleasure to be able to introduce, we're at fun facts. Arturo's first name is Candido, Arturo Archuleta, who served as the program manager for the New Mexico Land Grant Council and the UNM, University of New Mexico Land Grant Studies program since 2016. He has been at the forefront of advocacy, providing technical assistance to the land grants, of helping the Grant Merced communities face the many challenges we do and they do. He's got a master's degree in community and regional planning from the University of New Mexico and a BA in political science from Eastern New Mexico University, which is in my district. He is actually a land grant heir, as you could imagine, of one of the most famous land grants, the Tierra Maria land grant. He's also an active and voting member of the Manzano land grant. And I just can imagine that Arturo envisions his work as essential so that he can pass on a strong land grant to his teenage sons, Arturo and Cruz. Mr. Archuleta?
Mr. Archuleta, are you with us?
Yes.
I can see there. All right, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Buenos dias, de Dios. Good morning, Chairman Neguse, Ranking Member Fulcher, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today on House Resolution 5493. And thank you to the bill sponsor, Congresswoman Teresa Ledger Fernandez, for bringing this forward. My name is Arturo Archuleta, and I am here today on behalf of the New Mexico Land Grant Council and the New Mexico Land Grant Merced Consejo. Land Grant Merced communities were established between 1692 and 1854 through the granting of land from the Spanish Crown and Mexican government in what is now the United States Southwest. Our communities were settled and populated by our Mestizo and Genízaro ancestors. When established, these land grants included surrounding common lands that provided the natural resources needed for the survival of our communities. These common lands were never intended to be privatized nor alienated from the community's common ownership and use. In 1848, at the close of the Mexican-American War, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed between the United States and Mexico, included provisions to protect the property rights of private citizens and communities existing in the Southwest. The United States had a treaty obligation to recognize and uphold the titles to land established by the prior sovereigns of Mexico and Spain. As a result, land grant Merced property claims in New Mexico were adjudicated over a period that lasted more than 50 years. The process was faulty, inefficient, inequitable, and in some cases fraudulent and corrupt, oftentimes with U.S. government officials directly involved in the corruption. The end result of this unjust process was that millions of acres of common land were stripped from the ownership of our local communities. Much of these former common lands are now managed by federal agencies like the U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management. The Land Grant Mercedes Traditional Use Recognition and Consultation Act is the product of over 10 years of work between our communities and the New Mexico Congressional Delegation. In December of 2020, during the 116th Congress, this same bill, then known as House Resolution 3682, was passed by the House but failed to make it through the Senate. This act will provide for the recognition of long-standing traditional uses practiced by land-grant Merced communities on federally managed lands. Under state law, land grants are local government entities capable of entering into official consultation with the federal government. As traditional land-based communities, we have long-standing practices and customs that are reliant on the use of the natural resources that surround us. These uses are ingrained in the cultural fabric of our communities. Like our Native American cousins, accessing and protecting our traditional uses and associated natural resources on federal lands plays a critical role to ensuring the cultural integrity of our communities. In the past, our communities have seen our access and traditional use needs ignored or stripped away completely by federal government agencies. Today, we have established a more positive working relationship with federal agencies, and we hope to codify this with this bill. Our communities support the multiple use approach on federal lands, as we believe that our traditional uses are compatible with most of the uses found on public lands and in national forests today. Being afforded opportunities for consultation and involvement in management decisions concerning the natural resources surrounding our communities is vital to the overall health and socioeconomic well-being of our people. We rely on the forested uplands to provide sufficient water for drinking, irrigating crops, and watering of livestock. We rely on vegetation products like wild herbs and piñon nuts for cultural practices and medicinal purposes. Our communities have continuous annual needs to access fuel wood to heat our homes in the fall, winter, and early spring. During economically challenging times like those we've recently faced, firewood is a necessity for basic survival, as we have many families that cannot afford the high cost of propane and natural gas. Additionally, our communities continue to suffer from the loss of communal grazing opportunities on lands now managed by the federal government. Where in the past, livestock grazing of communal pastures provided a guaranteed protein source for families, today closed allotments offer only aesthetics for an occasional hiker. In reality, both uses are completely compatible. In the past, our communities have been placed at odds with federal land management agencies, not by choice, but as a direct result of having our traditional use needs ignored, in part because we have not always been at the table when land management decisions are being made. The recognition and consultation aspects of this bill are important first steps in addressing and rectifying historical wrongs that have crippled our communities for over a century. For decades, our communities have suffered social injustice and economic hardship as a direct result of being denied meaningful access to traditional uses on our former common lands. The passage of House Resolution 5493 would help ensure that federal land management policies and practices, regardless of changes in the administration, will honor, respect, and protect our traditional uses today and for future generations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I'll yield.
Thank you for your testimony and for being here with us today. The witness testimony portion is over. Thank you again to each of the witnesses for their valuable testimony. Reminding the members that Committee Rule 3, subparagraph D, imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chair will now recognize members for any questions that they may wish to ask the witnesses, and the chair will start by recognizing the ranking member, Mr. Fulcher, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to all of the witnesses just for some good input today. I have a couple of questions. Mr. Hooser, if I could just start with you. You had mentioned the situation that Trinity County is in and the challenges there with 75% of the county land being operated by the federal government, and impacts such as shutting down the harvesting of timber and mining. Mr. Hooser, when did that happen? The shutdown of timber and mining, and how because I've got some counties in a similar situation. How has the county made up for that? How have you covered various services and education funding?
Well, I guess I was hoping for easier questions, but I'm going to do my best here.
Sorry.
It's all right. Mining activity shut down long ago. I mean, that's in the distant past. Timber activities, there are still about 200,000 acres in private timber hands, Sierra Pacific Industries, and there still is timber activity on that. It's managed for timber production. I would say on federal ground, it's been a gradual reduction. You know, I've been here close to 11 years, and most of that decline occurred prior to my arrival. I did live in a neighboring county for 6 years before that and had some exposure. Forest fire activity actually now drives the timber market here, and that there's a rush to salvage timber after fires, and it's creating some kind of strange dynamics within the market here. Is Trinity PUD, our largest customer, is actually a lumber mill, but they get virtually none of their timber supply from federally managed ground. It is just extremely challenging to harvest timber on federal ground here. I know that's probably not a satisfactory answer, but.
So what has the county done in order to cover the necessary services that you're required to fund?
Well, maybe in the interest of too much candor, the largest, most growing industry here is now cannabis cultivation. California is a state that has legalized cannabis cultivation for recreational and medicinal use. And, on the small amount of private land that's available here, we're seeing quite a bit of that activity. I would say it certainly hasn't replaced former timber activity in terms of economic value, but it is what's happening now.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hooser. Unfortunately, we have to look at other ways to cover expenses, I guess, when the federal government has so much control. But I'd like to take the remaining time I have and ask Mr. Lannon a similar question. Mr. Lannon, you've got a large federal footprint in Skamania. Let me ask you a very similar question. How has the county funded the necessary services that you've been required to fund, given that large federal footprint? Mr. Lannon?
Well, it's been a real struggle. I'm in my second term, and when the Northwest Forest Plan was put in place, essentially harvest on the Gifford Pinchot Forest dropped from an average of 346 million board feet a year to, in 2001, it was 2 million board feet. They have struggled to get back to maybe 50 million. The impact on the county was offset initially by what they called OWL payments, or the Secure Rural Schools funds. In 2000, the county received about $8 million a year in those offsetting funds. Over the years, those have continually declined. Today, it's closer to $1 million. Our biggest move was in 2010 to 11. We laid off about 25% of staff, and we have remained under those conditions. When I was first elected, we had a huge ice storm, and I got calls from our citizens complaining that why did it take so long to get the roads plowed? And I was at a loss for an answer. So in talking to Public Works, they said, well, anybody who's lived here for any period of time will know that back in the early 2000s, we had 40 people on the road crew. Today we have 10. So do the math. The number of miles of road hasn't changed. So what was done in a week is now taking a month. Our budget in last year was the same as it was in 2007. So,
Mr. Lannon, I've run over my time, so thank you for that. Mr. Lannon, Mr. Hooser, just know that there's a number of us that are trying to get some help your direction. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Ms. Leger Fernandez for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Archuleta, for explaining the unique history and importance of our land grant communities to New Mexico. I'm also glad you pointed out that land grants are recognized as a governmental entity under state law. Very unique because of our unique history, right? So, Mr. Archuleta, in the spirit of including these traditional use communities, these governmental unities in conversation with the federal government, can you tell me what you think the definition of land grant consultation should be?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Congresswoman Leger Fernandez. Similar to the federally recognized tribes, our land-based communities have vested property right interests in federal lands in New Mexico that existed prior to the United States establishing sovereignty here in the state. And so unlike the general public, our communities require enhanced engagement with federal land management agencies, particularly as it relates to the protection and the use of our traditional uses on those lands. One of the reasons that this bill even came about is because of some of the inability of federal agencies like the Forest Service, because they lack the authority to really engage our communities at a higher level. We've been able to utilize cooperative agency agreements as local units of government. But when we initially started some of our engagement activities, for example, with the U.S. Forest Service, with plan revision, their initial kind of view was that we were similar to general public and we had to engage in that way. And the reality is, because of our deep connection and the impact that those natural resources have in our communities, we really have to be able to engage in ongoing conversations in a government to government capacity with the agency, so that management plans as well as implementation ensures the protection of our needs.
Right. And I would take it you agree with the idea that tribal consultation is a different thing, but land grant consultation can be defined and described in a different manner. And I think it would also be important for you to, can you share an example of what has gone wrong when the federal government and the federal agencies have failed to engage in those conversations, have failed to engage in those communications? We know that it's gotten a lot better, but we want to make sure it is always better. But can you share an example of something that hasn't worked right and that would be changed if we had this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Congresswoman Ledger Fernandez. Yes. In our history, we've had a lot of unfortunate events. For example, in the early 1950s, many of our land grant communities suffered the loss of their communal grazing access on Forest Service lands, where those communal grazing rights were taken away. And then subsequently, those lands were incorporated into the wilderness system. And since the uses were not in place at the time, because the agencies had stripped them, those uses were not grandfathered in. So those communities have, even though they still exist adjacent to these wilderness areas, they have forever been barred from being able to re-engage in activities such as communal grazing, even though it may provide a benefit to the forest today. And so, the hope with having consultation, and again, unlike consultation with federal tribes, but having a more enhanced engagement with federal agencies, we would hope would protect and prevent that from happening in the future, where the agency would, this bill would require them to not only engage in conversations, but actually incorporate our traditional use needs into the management plans themselves, to ensure that regardless of changes in administration, we'll be able to continue to have Forest Service management practices and BLM management practices recognize the importance of our needs for those lands.
I went and visited, I did a Aguas Vida tour, and I've had like 5 visits about the importance of water and water management across my district because of the droughts. And one of them included going to the Carson Forest Service, where they are actually incorporating in a mayordomo system, which is taking a concept from our land grant communities and our second communities and putting it into forest management, and it is working wonderfully. I can imagine that there are many practices that the land grants have that would actually help improve the forests. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Congressman Fernandez, that's correct. Just the accessing field wood for our local needs would also improve watershed health for our communities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Archuleta. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Moore for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Goose. My questions will be for Mr. Tom Lannon and Mr. Roberts. First, Mr. Lannon, I really do appreciate the concept behind HR 5093, Jamie Herrera Butler, Rep Butler's legislation. Can you give us a little context on where the idea for this conveyance, where did it originate from? How long has something like this been in the works?
Well, the initial conveyance took place back in late 1900s. And I think that was probably driven from the impact of the Northwest Forest Plan and the fact that the Forest Service had shut the nursery down as well as the other administrative sites. So we had good funding, I think, for a number of years. But as we got near 2010, we didn't have the funds to invest in it to the level that we wanted. So the commissioners before me changed that and said, this is a gem, we need to preserve it. So we've been committed over about 7 to 10 years now of investing in it. It produces revenue. We have a preschool there that is doing well. There's commercial rentals and whatnot. So the 7 houses potentially would create a revenue stream that would allow us to bring on 2 to 3 groundskeepers for the area. And we have a long-term plan of possibly having an interpretive center for the Gifford Pinchot. So that's kind of where we've gone. We have committed substantial revenues from the county, and we're committed to reinvesting any revenues that it generates back into the site.
In your testimony, you listed a number of benefits you expect to see from this conveyance of federal lands. You've spoken to it already, but can you talk us through a little bit more about how you went about building local support for this effort? What major challenges, what wins did you experience through building this local support?
I think the first one was just being able to cooperate with the Forest Service. The management there realizing that they had this deferred maintenance that was a burden for them. In terms of local support, it's been very broad. Most the Chamber of Commerce, the schools, the Port Authority are all very much in favor of it. We created an advisory committee that has representatives from various areas within the county, and they're all in favor of it. It's difficult to appreciate how restricted things are given the Gorge Commission's regulations for development. We've only got 8,000 acres in urban development acres that can be developed commercially within the scenic area. 8,000 acres out of 1,000,001. Taxable acres, 19,000 out of 1,000,001. So it's been a struggle, and it gets very difficult going back with your hand out all the time, asking for reauthorization of secure rural schools when you actually have a resource there that could cover that. But that's difficult in this era. So,
thank you, Mr. Roberts. I'll ask a similar question, just briefly. Can you describe the process undertaken to build local support for the conveyance, and why local support is so important for the effort that you undertook?
Well, good question, sir. Certainly appreciate it. The way we got about local control is certainly, I think the department has credibility. The state has credibility in the Black Hills. So just engaging those stakeholders that we work with, whether that be right in the property, the immediate Superfund site, or engaging the city councils, county commission, and Forest Service and EPA as we work through the process. I think that certainly our credibility and our effort to make sure that our water quality is good and that the site is cleaned up appropriately really spoke volumes to the group. Certainly the groups that we've discussed it with, certainly we had great inroads by doing that. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, with my last 20 seconds, I'll just make a point to my colleagues, to the administration, anybody willing to listen to this. Like, if you come to Utah, you'll find that politicians, local stakeholders across the board, across the political spectrum, care deeply about our land, care deeply about what we're actually trying to accomplish, care deeply about management plans. And when we make big, overarching, federal government decisions based on the lands in Utah, it doesn't work. It's not the right way to go about it, but we actually do care, and building out local support is incredibly important. And that's what I urge us to always be focused on. So thank you all. Chairman, I go back.
The gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Huffman.
Mr. Chair, I have no questions. I'll yield.
The gentleman yields. I believe, let me just make sure, are there any other members of the minority that are on the line that wish to question the witnesses? Hearing none, are there any members of the majority that wish to question the witnesses? Hearing none, that concludes.
I mean, how could anybody follow that, Mr. Neguse? I mean,
that concludes. we're all very grateful that you appeared today, Mr. Moore. That concludes the witness portion of the hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, subparagraph O, members of the committee must submit a witness question must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you, everyone.